Welcome back to Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. And now we have our guest, Brenda Myles, PhD. Brenda is president of AAPC Publishing, which is a small niche company that publishes books on autism spectrum disorder. We've had some of her authors here on the show.
And really
welcome to the show, Brenda.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, and Brenda is rather prolific. Her bio is several pages here, but I just want to mention that she's written over 2,000 articles on ASD as well as 200 books. Anything else you'd like to tell us about your background, Brenda, before we get started?
No, I think that might just set the stage.
Okay, yeah. That's what I call prolific.
Incredible.
Now, we wanted to talk to you today about an article that you have written about the cycle of tantrums, rage, and meltdowns in children and youth with ASD, because that's something that's a particular interest to our families.
Pretty much everybody has experienced this at some point, and nothing can take the wind out of your sails faster than a meltdown, because after that, then you live in fear of it happening again. You live in fear of it happening at the worst possible moment. So we love having you here to talk about this exact subject.
Yes, and we want to know, how common is this with our population of kids with ASD?
At least 50% of autistic individuals experience meltdowns, if not more. And one of the things that is particularly tragic is that if we do not intervene, those meltdowns will keep on happening.
Absolutely. And so let's start to unlock this. Why do meltdowns occur?
Okay, well, meltdowns occur because of neurological reasons. Sometimes people like to think that the behavior is purposeful, but there's a firm base of literature that shows us that there's underactivity in the parts of the brain in charge of self-regulation, which means that for our individuals with autism, they don't automatically know how to detect how they are feeling. They don't know how to match an emotion to event, and they don't know how to calm down once they experience a meltdown.
So
the important I'm sorry.
That's okay. Keep going. I interrupted you.
The important thing is that the meltdowns are not purposeful behavior. It is the only behavior the individual has in their repertoire at that period of time.
It's like a desperate thing.
Okay.
And we see that.
So tell us what the cycle of the meltdown looks like. You have a cycle that you have identified with different stages. Can you talk about that?
Well, there are 3 stages. There's the rumbling stage is the first. The second is called the rage stage, and the third stage is called the recovery stage. The most important part of these particular stages is the rumbling stage, and you may have seen our individuals rumble, meaning that they may engage in small behaviors that indicate that a large behavior is likely to occur later. So, for example, you may see a child indicating that they are becoming upset by drumming their fingers or pulling on their eyebrows or pacing back and forth, biting on their cuffs. Quite often at this stage, the behaviors are really seem minor, and unless you're attuned to them, you can overlook them easily. And what we need to be is very much in tune to what is happening so that we can intervene and stop that meltdown at that point.
Well, that brings up a really important point. Once we start to be able to identify those, what can we do at each stage to help to take the fuse out of this?
Okay, well, during that first stage, the rumbling stage, the goal is to distract the individual.
Okay.
Because if you can distract them, then you can begin to calm down. What you're not going to do at this level is to teach a new skill. Because the minute the individual begins to rumble, what I say is all opportunities for learning are gone. So if you see your child or your student, perhaps their rumbling behavior is, scratching their head. And if that is the case, then what you might do is send that child on an errand.
Because that's the distraction.
Yes, it could be that maybe you engage that child in a discussion about his special interest on, flags of the world.
Hmm.
It could be that you offer the child or direct the child to a break.
Okay, we
But
refer to this as antiseptic bouncing. Is that what it's called?
ye, okay, great. Antiseptic bouncing is exactly one of those terms that means to, intervene and remove the child from the situation in a non-punitive way. And so if I send the child to run an errand, I'm engaging in antiseptic bouncing for that student.
And what is proximity control?
Well, some of our students feel very comfortable when we stand next to them. And you've probably experienced this with a child who is rumbling, maybe pulling on his lip, and you go stand next to that individual, and they can see that, okay, you are there to support them. And you can see sometimes their bodies immediately relax.
Yeah,
Okay.
amazing.
Now, the thing is with these interventions, not all of these interventions will work with all children who have autism, and so you have to match each one of those interventions to the individual child.
Okay, so that's rumbling. What about the other stages? What can we be doing?
Okay. Well, the rage stage is when that child actually has that meltdown and engages in those big overt behaviors, or it could be withdrawal. And at that point in time, what you largely want to do is, if you can get that child safely out of that environment, that is a great thing to do. However, many of our kids at that stage just need to have that meltdown in the spot they're in. And so what we need to do is to protect that student to make sure that he does not hurt himself. If there's others in the environment, we need to have a plan in place. And so if we're talking about school, it might be that we have a plan and we've practiced with the other students. And what happens is the teacher can stay with our student and help him calm down from that rage cycle. I'm a big fan, however, of making sure that our teachers who support our kids with autism, even though I do not support restraint, because sometimes what that does is that will increase that behavior during the rage cycle, is to make sure the teachers are trained in restraint, because what we don't want is a teacher who is a bit reticent, who hasn't been trained, to reach in and physically try to redirect that child. The child could get hurt, or the adult could get hurt.
And in fact, frequently that is what happens, is that the adult doesn't know what to do and the adult gets hurt. And what I hate is that gets pinned on the child. And it becomes such a huge problem when, in fact, if we gave proper training to the teacher to know how to diffuse or how to stand, and there are specific stances and specific
Yes.
ways to hold your arms so that you prevent yourself from being hurt, which protects the child. And it's so difficult to convince schools of this, but it's the truth.
Well, I developed something called the Student Crisis Plan Sheet, which takes each one of those three stages and talks about the behaviors that you are likely to see and the interventions that go along with each stage. Because we need to approach this like, an educational problem and make sure that we have strategies. The teacher needs to know, as you said, where to stand, what to do, what to say, what not to say. You need to have a plan in place of what happens if there's other people in the environment. Do you need help? How do you get it? If a child has, any likelihood of having a meltdown, this needs to be discussed seriously and have a plan in place. And then further, we need to make sure that the child himself or herself knows that we do not blame the child for that behavior, that it is neurologically based, but we also recognize that we can teach that child and that child can learn to regulate their behavior with our support.
Yeah, the last stage we didn't mention, which is the recovery stage.
Now, the recovery stage is the stage where that meltdown behavior has stopped. And the child may look like he's back to his typical self, but he is not. Generally, our students at the recovery stage will need some time to get back to their typical self. But while this is happening, generally they like to get right back into the schedule. As you know, our children, adolescents, and adults love routine. And so if our child has a meltdown and gets to the recovery stage and it's math time, most likely he will want to participate in the routine of math. But because he is so fragile at that point, I recommend that teachers will have a folder, kind of a plan B folder, if you will, that has work the individual can do, so that if the teacher's planning on introducing new concepts, that child can work on information that he already knows because it won't be as cognitively draining. Also, at that recovery stage, you're going to want to maintain your distance. Quite often, adults, when a child has a meltdown, they want to hover over that individual with the best of intentions to make sure that they are okay. And for many of our individuals, they might misperceive this, and this might make the child more uncomfortable and lead to another meltdown.
Okay.
During this stage, also, there's no reason to refer to the meltdown.
It's such a salient point.
Yes.
We're running out of time, and so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the book that people should get that will give them more information about this.
Okay, well, the book is called High Functioning Autism and Difficult Moments, Practical Solutions for Meltdowns.
It's lovely.
And it outlines each of the 3 stages. It explains why the meltdowns occur, and then offers instructional strategies to teach the child how not to melt down.
And
Great.
where can they get this book?
Well, they can get it from Amazon.com, or they can get it at the AAPC website at www.aapcpublishing.net.
Spectacular. And this is not the only book that you have out right now. You've got another book. Tell us about that.
Well, I have a brand new book out. It's called Excelling with Autism, and it looks at the challenges that we are having in helping individuals with autism reach their potential. And it takes the elements of deliberate practice, which is what we use to teach high-performing people, whether they are mathematicians or artists or pianists, and it tells you how to take that science of deliberate practice and apply it to individuals with autism so that they can meet their potential.
Absolutely
great.
love it. I want to thank you so much for being with us. This has been so educational.
Yes.
Really lovely. And we thank you for all the work that you're doing personally and all the work that you're doing in publishing, because
Right. As we said, we've
been
had some of
enjoying
your
it.
authors on and
It's
we've been
been lovely.
enjoying them.